Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? I'm really excited to be here. You're right here at RightsCon, at our session here, which is going to be discussing global connectivity. Where are we heading next after COVID-19? So thank you and welcome for joining this session. So I just want to set the stage. I've got an exciting panel with me. And it's going to be very interesting. I just wanted to set the stage so that we can have a sense of where we are now when it comes to connectivity and digital cooperation. So 50% of the world is unconnected today, possibly higher now that we have COVID-19. And what the two lessons that COVID-19 has shown is that we have a glaring inequality in internet access in the world. And then secondly, internet is not a luxury, it is a lifeline. So we are 10 years from 2030, where we are all hoping to have universal access, and there are goals that countries have signed up to. And we need to take stock and have a renewed sense of purpose on how we are going to achieve meaningful and universal broadband for everyone by that date. So in 2018, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has assembled a high-level panel on digital cooperation. Last month, this high-level panel came together with a host of various players, including private sector, civil society, and governments, to look at a set of recommendations which were presented to the international community. And two of those there were 8 principles that were lined up, which we'll be talking about shortly. But two of them that stood out for me was that we will ensure that meaningful connectivity for all persons, that the web is safe, and that rights are also protected online. So there's a work cut out for all of us, and this is a discussion that is very essential at this time as we go through COVID-19, whether you're in confinement, whether you're coming out of lockdown, or whether you're going back into lockdown, hopefully not. So in this session, we're going to be looking at the UN efforts towards digital cooperation. We're also going to look at the role of regional bodies and also the role of private sector in trying to make sure that we get towards the goals that we've set for ourselves. So with me on this panel, very important guests. I have with me the first panelist is my good friend, Mr. Fabrizio Hochschild Drummond, who is originally from Chile. He's a special advisor on the preparations for the commemoration of the United Nations 75th anniversary at the Under Secretary General level. That's quite a mouthful. Welcome, Fabrizio. Mr. Hochschild, who has been serving as Assistant Secretary General for Strategic Coordination in the Executive Office of the Secretary General since 2017. So we also have with us Mr. Lassina Kone. He's the Director General and CEO of Smart Africa. Smart Africa is a regional body that has been doing a lot of work on the African continent to drive digital connectivity and policy work. And they have a very exciting strategy that's out there. I would encourage you to look at their site. Prior to this, Mr. Kone was the advisor to the Prime Minister of the Republic of Cote d'Ivoire from 2017 to 2018. He was in charge of digital transformation and public reforms. And he was also the advisor to the president from 2011 to 2017. So we have a very important person. Welcome, Mr. Lassina Kone.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Last but not least, we have Sonia Bashir Kabir. Sonia is a very passionate woman very passionate about digital, and she's very well versed in the tech space. She's a technology investor focused on technical startups in emerging markets of South Asia. She's currently the founder of SBK Tech Ventures and SBK Foundation, which I believe are the abbreviations for her name. And she also has a not-for-profit entity which believes in empowering rural communities with technology. Sonia, welcome to this panel.
Thank you, Eleanor.
So we'll start with you, Fabrizio, since you very well. Can you walk us through the the UN, the digital cooperation, and let us know what's the status of digital cooperation to date.
Well, thank you very much. And let me start by saying what an honor it is to be with you and on such a distinguished panel. I only wish I were with you in person, and even more, I wish I were with you in person in Costa Rica, as was originally intended. The state of digital cooperation on many levels is not so great. We're, at the beginning, or some would argue halfway through, digital fragmentation, with the danger of the internet devolving into various splinter nets, and we see that in the international friction there is around access of different companies around the world. We see that in the shutdowns. We see that in the different approaches to content moderation and surveillance. So we're seeing increasingly countries take very different attitudes towards the internet. The other major challenge is that there's a massive digital divide, which you alluded to, Elena, at the outset. We have just over 50% of the world connected, and we have under 50% still not connected. And among those unconnected are people who are already discriminated against. There's a the majority of women across the world are not connected. The majority of rural populations are not connected. Many minority groups have a deficit in connection. So as the developed world grows more and more connected, as you say, the internet ceases to be a luxury and becomes a foundation of our education systems, a foundation of our health systems, a foundation of our economies. And what that means for those who are not connected is that they're left further behind. And the digital divide has a massive exacerbating effect on all other inequalities. And the third challenge we face next to the splinter net, the digital divide, is the disjunct between innovation and risk-taking in the tech sector, with businesses moving at an ever more rapid speed in transforming our world, and policymakers who are moving in a much more cautious, much more conservative, much more slower way. So de facto, what we're seeing is that the digital world is developing largely through a laissez-faire approach, with very little policy guidance from those whose job it is to keep the public safe. So we find that there are all sorts of unintended consequences and malicious uses, from a massive rise in cyber attacks to the dissemination of hate speech and discriminatory and sometimes dangerous content. Now, I think at a national and in some cases at a regional level, policymakers are rapidly catching up, and we see more and more instances, and I think that trend has been accelerated through COVID, of policymakers doing their jobs, of providing the guardrails for the safe use, to maximize the safe use of these technologies and to curtail the harms. But at the international level, at the global level, there's still a massive deficit in global policies. And that absence of global policies is facilitating the digital divides that I referred to earlier. So the Secretary General, based on the work of a very diverse, multi-stakeholder, high-level panel, and based on really very thorough conversations, I'd like to say the most thorough multi-stakeholder conversations that have ever happened in the formulation of a Secretary General report, put out a series of recommendations that we believe represents a convergence of view of how we should better steer the internet moving forward, better steer it to ensure it helps in the fulfillment of the 2030 agenda, upholds our human rights, and reduces rather than furthers inequality. And better also in the sense to ensure that it's more secure and better fulfills our human rights rather than undermining them. And there are a series of recommendations in 8 basic areas. The first and foremost, and the overriding priority, is gaining meaningful, affordable access for all. And that's the principal recommendation. But to do that, it means we have to greatly increase and improve our digital inclusion efforts and our capacity building efforts. And there are a series of recommendations around capacity and digital inclusion. And then if we talk about meaningful content, not just spreading the internet so that we all have access to better deals online, although there's no harm in that, but more meaningful content in terms of content as the internet was intended in the eyes of its founder, content that would spread knowledge, that would empower and allow for better international cooperation in knowledge sharing and science. We also need to boost public goods. And that's digital public goods. And that's the 4th area of recommendation. And then, of course, it's critical that the internet is a means to uphold our human rights, not to undermine them, and a means to improve our security and not undermine it, whether it's undermined through interstate friction or our personal security. And so there are a series of recommendations around digital human rights and trust, digital trust and security. Then there are also recommendations around the new and probably soon to be most dominant manifestation of digital technologies, which of course is artificial intelligence. And again, there are recommendations along the lines of how we can have better exchanges of best practices in that area. And finally, the 8th area is trying to reinforce the existing digital governance infrastructure, which is really needs a lot of improvement to scale up to the challenges we face in the digital world. So these are the 8 areas of the recommendations. We feel that if we're really to steer this wonderful, amazing tool to good and ensure that what we inherited and served us so well, we leave behind in a better state than it's drifting towards today, we believe that coming together behind the implementation of the roadmap will be absolutely critical.
That's absolutely wonderful to hear you, Fabrizio. As you were speaking, I was just thinking about, the point you raised about the fragmentation of the internet and why we need to move towards a more united and focused approach. You also mentioned the need for digital inclusion, meaningful connectivity, meaningful content. So these are all very wonderful ideals that we really need to strive for. So I just I'm coming to you, Lassina, because I know you've been working so hard on the African continent, looking at cooperation efforts itself through the Smart Africa initiative. So could you just let me know how this has been working? How has cooperation been? And how has the private sector and government, how have they been reacting towards digital cooperation efforts on the continent?
Thank you very much for inviting me, Eleanor, and good afternoon and good evening to everyone. All the people observe. The pandemic has actually accelerated the message we've been preaching over the past decade. And I'm happy to see quite a lot of digital collaboration happening due to this COVID-19. We can say we have a good problem, as I can say it, at hand, and we do not want to waste it, because COVID-19 really has been able to convince many in the use of the technology to solve issues of tracing and testing and for the pandemic, and also shown that we can work, like shown us that, we can work school and transact the business from home, because of social distancing. That's what it's about. We don't see, in a Smart Africa view, we don't see any tools that can actually concretely solve the social distanciations apart from using the ICT in these days. So during this period, Smart Africa has released a technical advisory document to guide member states on actions to take to support the spike in the internet utilizations while maintaining the social economic activities. The topic, cut across e-services, e-health, education, capacity building, as mentioned by Fabrizio, broadband connectivity, financial services, and startup ecosystem. I'm very happy that many countries adopted in various ways, such as giving a free spectrum. We've seen that happening, zero rating educational, and we've even seen in Ghana actually reducing the tax rate on the MNOs to from 9% to 5%. We've seen that happening, and even the mobile transactions, mobile money transaction, and encouraging fintech. Now I'm moving forward. Really, the Smart Africa Secretariat, we are keen to sustain the use of technology that has initiated several projects to ensure the basic enabler of connectivity becomes affordable, meaningful, and accessible. In trying to make internet affordable and accessible, we did a feasibility study recently, and we found out the following outcome that I will share with you. 50% of our member states have a GDP per capita of less than $2,000 a year, which makes them fall within the league of at least the developed country, the LDCs. 30% of our member states in Africa here are landlocked and have the least broadband penetration and pay the most price for the internet use. An example, you see 72% of internet traffic usage in the member countries in Smart Africa comes from only 5 countries which have a direct access to the sea. So all things being equal, we expect a 7-fold increase in consumption for the next 5 years. So with the above in mind, and knowing that the Sustainable Development Goal by the UN, we know that we only have 10 years to go, the Secretariat has 3 major projects to ensure a sustainable approach towards the broadband increase in Africa. Number 1 is we need to interconnect all the countries in Africa with a high-speed terrestrial fiber or satellite as the backhaul solution. I know this may sound very ambitious, but Smart Africa, we have begun a project which is led by the Republic of Guinea as a flagship project. The project is titled Intra-Africa Connectivity Project. This project will ensure access to the huge capacity by the landlocked and LDC countries, as well as we will be connecting countries together via high-speed bandwidth. We began implementation recently in January 2020, and we are proud to announce that Mali, Guinea, Sierra Leone have been connected together. Number 2, we need to make the service affordable by aggregating our internet bandwidth purchase. Because when we talk about connectivity, there's also something called affordability, what we call meaningful connectivity. With the current bottleneck of landlocked countries, we are expecting a 7-fold increase in internet usage. Imagine the growth we will see when interconnect all the countries together. Now, with this in mind, Smart Africa has embarked on yet another project to secure collaborations with international broadband service providers. By aggregating all the projected volume of the internet, we expect to reduce the cost of the broadband of internet services by at least 30%, which is very significant. And the last point is, we need to focus on supporting countries with affordable last mile solution. We have just concluded the development of a broadband strategy that is a project-based outlook. We identify that the last mile solution is one of the major deficits in our bid to improve the broadband penetration in Africa, which is currently at 39%, while the rest of the world is about 54%. And with the Smart Africa plan, we are intending to increase that penetration to 50% by 2025. So we are calling on all the interest stakeholders to join us as a part of the Smart Broadband 2025 to help in implementing the pilot project across member states, which will focus on ensuring connectivity in a meaningful way. once again, thank you. That's what I have to contribute right now.
You have a lot to contribute, Lassina. But you mentioned some really very important points in your submission. It's very interesting to
Yes.
note that 30% of your members are landlocked countries, and it's I remember we did a research at A4AI which showed that landlocked countries tend to spend higher amounts in connecting. Definitely, cooperation is very important between them and the
Yes.
countries that are surrounded by the coast. And so with new players, submarine cables such as Equiano and Simba coming on board, it's important that we also look at that cooperation to bring down the cost of connecting the citizens in the landlocked countries. So it's very important. It's a very important project that Smart Africa is taking up, and kudos to you and your team for that effort.
Thank you.
So coming to you now, Sonia, we want to see what's happening in South Asia. You've heard all these interesting initiatives from Africa and what Fabrizio has also mentioned on digital cooperation. But you're one of the first ladies to invest in the tech space. And I'm really curious to find out why you chose to invest in tech or go into tech in the first place. And secondly, what you think about digital cooperation and what it means to you as an entrepreneur. Sonia, we can't hear you, so you might have to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's great.
Thank you, Eleanor. Very excited to be part of this program. So my passion is technology. I worked with technology in Silicon Valley, and that's the only field I know. That is why I've gone on this journey to just promote technology. As the world goes towards a digital transformation, we are seeing that technology is just a reflection of us. It is neither a divider nor is it an equalizer. It just takes the instructions we provide and it follows that. So when we're doing this digital transformation, the whole idea is to democratize technology, which means take technology to the hands of all the people, the marginalized and those who do not have had access before. In order to do that, we feel that it's just connectivity, providing just connectivity in Southeast Asia, from my example, is really not the solution. The solution we've seen is a reverse, where you begin with services that is meeting an unmet or unarticulated need, that is solving a problem for a citizen, and that will leverage the connectivity. So what we're seeing here is that technology is allowing us to solve problems which haven't been solved before. And another differentiation here is that most people think technology is just about disruption by going from manual to automation. That is really not technology. It has to solve a problem. It has to be meaningful, and it has to meet the needs of the people. In Southeast Asia, we're seeing that we have a lot of people, and data is now currency. Data is electricity. We are able to solve problems and generate a lot of data from which we can share with the other parts of the world, the other parts of the emerging market, and solve problems. So I couldn't have been more happier than now to be part of this, to witness the global digital cooperation that is going to be happening.
I wanted to touch a bit on what you just mentioned about technology is allowing us to solve problems, which are meaningful and also relevant. So quick one from your personal experience, what one problem do you think that in your experience technology has been able to allow us to solve?
So I'm speaking from experience from the Southeast Asia perspective. After the pandemic, where people's movement was restricted and there was a requirement to meet doctors or consult with doctors, we have seen a lot of health tech startups emerge where services could be telemedicine, teleconsultation was being able to give through technology, where you could connect the patient and the doctor. Another area we've seen that has really sprung forward is education. As children could not go to schools or universities, we have seen that ed tech or putting in technology in education and teaching through digital skills or digital means has taken a leap forward. And the third area that we've seen the technology has really helped is the fintech space, where payments are being made digitally as opposed to in person, going to banks or exchanging cash.
Yeah, no, those are very important points, and I think it's not just peculiar to South Asia alone. I think you can see this in a lot of developing regions across the world. So it's very important to hear these examples. So coming back to you, Fabrizio, we've talked about your digital cooperation, and you've mentioned a lot about global connectivity in your discussions about the need to have meaningful connectivity, the need to look at it holistically. So I wanted to hear a little bit about sorry, I think I'm coming to you rather, Lassina, not Lassina first. You remember that A4AI, that's my organization, worked very closely with the World Bank on the digital moonshot for Africa. And we had a report that came out. And one key aspect of that report said that there was an estimation of about $109 billion was needed to bring Africa to universal access. So we're talking about 4G equivalent of technology, being able to connect at that rate, also being able to get very important devices, having connectivity at all times in different places. So I wanted to ask you about your members, particularly private sector and governments. How do you think, what would you think will incentivize them to be able to take advantage of this gap and be able to invest to close the gap?
Thank you very much. Yes, to be precise, you talk about a funding gap, which is close to 110, 120 billion US dollars for Africa. The incentives is quite very interesting. But before we even talk about incentive, let's look at the USF itself, Universal Access Funds. That was put together by most of the African countries, I said, including Smart Africa country members. If we look back, which was created 10, 15, 20 years ago, the time it was created, who were the stakeholders? It was the government and the regulators and the MNOs to give a basic connectivity. Back in the days, we were only familiar with the GSM telephone, 2G or 3G. But today we have application service providers, which are also taken into account in terms of stakeholdership. I think this conversation goes together with the track that we have within the broadband commissions that we call 21st century financing model. It's very important, it's all together. It's for us to think back and say, okay, if something worked 20 years ago with this limited funds of the universal access funds paid mainly by the operators, shall we continue with that model? Or should we look holistically and look at the entire ecosystem and the value chain to see how do we finance that gap? Because 120 billion US dollars for 54 countries, it's quite a lot of money. It's almost like a third of the total debt in Africa annually, which is estimated for about 370 something billion US dollars. So for us, what we did in Smart Africa is we came out with this project, we call it Broadband Strategy 2025. How do we contribute into shrinking that funding gap? By inviting private sector. We call this is ambassadorial program. What does that actually mean? It means work together with the regulators to ease up the regulations in countries in terms of licensing and authorizations for FTTH kind of thing, for last mile access solutions, concrete project which will allow the 30% unconnected people in Africa, because remember, 39% of Africa has a connectivity to broadband. We have about 30% which have connectivity but not affordable. We have another 30% which is not connected at all, because the funding gap will help actually to finance all of that. So we are encouraging private sector members who are with us, together with the regulators of each country, to actually contribute to the increased penetration of this broadband, which will eventually decrease the funding gap by 2025. And our objective is to reach about 50% broadband connectivity in terms of meaningful broadband connectivity by 2025. That's what we've been doing in Smart Africa regarding that funding gap.
You've raised an important point about regulations, and
Yes.
we can't stress how important having a very good, solid regulatory environment can help to stimulate investments. So thank you for mentioning that. Coming to you, Sonia, you've heard about the challenges that are within the Africa space. I wanted to find out whether they were similar within South Asia as well. Because you are within the tech space and you're also an entrepreneur, but what are some of the challenges that you've seen, and what kind of investments you think are needed to be able to close that funding gap in technology?
Thank you, Eleanor. So basically, I think one of the things that we're seeing is that connectivity is really dependent on fiber or cable. And there needs to be more invention on how connectivity is provided. So there's many other exploring activities happening, saying, can you provide connectivity through unused bandwidth of the television? Microsoft has a product called Whitespace, TV Whitespace, where they're saying everybody has a television. Can they use the unused bandwidth of the TV and then provide connectivity so citizens can get access? The funding gap is definitely big in Southeast Asia. All the government are trying to lay out the fiber and give access. But I think the issue is more, is not just related to the government, it is also the private sector. Because once we say we have provided connectivity, that doesn't really solve the problem. What will the people do with the connectivity? So that the services that need to be built on after connectivity has been provided is where all the tech giants, the tech companies are focusing, saying there has to be a need. Like right now, connectivity in Southeast Asia, if you ask people, they don't say whether they have connectivity. They say they have Facebook. So Facebook and connectivity have become very synonymous because the penetration is high. But when we're seeing with post-COVID, with services of health, education, and fintech taking place, that's where we see that the funding gap can be solved by investing more on technologies that solve the problem of the people, so that they are willingly able and also affordable to get the connectivity.
Yeah, and Sonia, I like the fact that you talked about the social media is not the full experience of the internet. Often people tend to look at that, and then but a very important point you also mentioned was about alternative and complementary technologies like community networks. You talked about TV white spaces. These are all very important parts of the ecosystem that sometimes we tend to focus a lot on mobile, which is fine because mobile has been the pioneer in this space. But it's important that we are looking at investments in new technologies as well. So thank you for raising that very great point. So coming to you, Fabrizio, you've heard the comments that have come from Nasina, you've heard from Sonia about some of the challenges and the investment gap. How do you think the UN Digital Cooperation Roadmap can help us to address some of these challenges that have been mentioned?
Well, we have to highlight that amidst the challenges, there are many great things happening. And even the picture in Africa is very, very varied. I mean, you have countries like Chad, like Niger, like Central Africa, where I served, like Burundi, that have connectivity rates of under or around 10%. And of course, they're tremendously disadvantaged. But then you have countries like Botswana, South Africa, Rwanda, where connectivity rates are well over 50%. And then, of course, you have Kenya, that seems to be ahead of everyone, with over 90%, some 90% of the population having access to the internet. And why does that happen? Kenya's been tremendously innovative, talking about overcoming some of the infrastructure challenges. We just saw a few weeks ago, Kenya using balloons to bring internet connectivity to remote areas. I think the problem is there's very little global steerage. So the best practices are not adequately shared, not adequately coordinated. We have many outstanding efforts going on, but they're not necessarily to scale. And that's what we need. We need better coordination. We need greater focus on those who are most excluded. And we need to bring efforts to scale. And I think what the roadmap does is provide the framework, the global blueprint that has been lacking. But the challenge now that we have the blueprint is to get all the different stakeholders, the private sector, civil society, the tech community, and above all governments onto the building site and get them working together on this blueprint. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have these very fragmented efforts, with some countries charging ahead, others being totally forgotten and left behind. And we're going to end up with greater inequality across the world and greater inequality within many countries. So I think now we need to rally behind the plan. We need to share better best practices. We need to bring our efforts to scale, and do that above all by cooperating much better. As Lassina indicated, where countries come together to negotiate together access to broadband deals, they're going to get much more better prices. And that's going to lead to overcoming the affordability gap, where regulatory frameworks, tax frameworks are better coordinated. The likelihood is we'll get better access, where investment is coordinated and better steered and better targeted at the most excluded, will progressively overcome the connectivity gap. But it's not going to happen unless we coordinate better, and we can't coordinate and cooperate better unless we have an overarching plan. And that, I think, we've got with the Secretary General's roadmap, which is, the Secretary General's roadmap, but it was put together with unprecedented multi-stakeholder consultation, and thus I think really represents the world's roadmap.
And Fabrizio, when you mentioned that we should get behind the roadmap, I do understand that UN has offices in almost every country. Would that be a great place to start in convening around some of the key pillars under this roadmap?
Well, I personally think we need to focus most on those left behind at the moment, the 47 least developed countries with connectivity rates of 19% or under. And in all those countries, I believe the UN has offices. And we need to look at those countries one by one. The deficits to ensuring meaningful, affordable access are very different country by country. And I think part of the problem is that to date, capacity building efforts have been supply driven, not needs driven. It's been individuals, companies saying, these are the capacities you need to operate our projects. It's been individual countries coming in and saying, this is our approach to cybersecurity. And within our national approach, this is the approach you need to adopt to be harmonious with our approach. We need to turn that logic around, and we need to do as we do, have long done on the development side, have long done on the humanitarian side. We need to look at what are the individual needs, what are the individual capacities in those countries, and develop capacity building around the specific needs and strengths of the country concerned. And the UN can help in that. And two UN agencies, the United Nations Development Programme and the International Telecommunications Union, are scaling up their capacity to do precisely that. And then we also have resident coordinators in all those countries. But we also need, because it's going to take resources, it's estimated that it will cost 100 billion to ensure universal access, affordable access in Africa by 2030. I think it's estimated that it will cost 4 times that sum to ensure it across the whole world. So we also need to build a platform of private investors, of international financial institutions, and of the financially more advantaged countries in order to get the investment platform in place to ensure that we reach those countries. So it's going to take a multitude of efforts from different angles. It's no small undertaking, but it's an absolutely vital undertaking if we really want to meet the SDGs by 2030. Unless we do it in the digital realm, and I think COVID, as Lassina has said, unless COVID has taught us that, unless we do it in the digital realm, we're past the point where we can just focus on the SDGs through an analog angle. And I would also, echo what was said by Sonia, who said, the digital reflects how we are. I think more than reflecting how we are, it magnifies how we are. So it can either magnify the reduction of inequalities, or it can magnify inequalities per se. It's a magnifier, it's an accelerator, and it's an enhancer. And at the moment, left adrift, it's sort of moving in the wrong direction. And we need to take the bull by the horns and steer it back towards being an accelerator, a turbocharge for meeting the SDGs. And I think if we work better together and using the UN system as a platform, we can do that.
Much, Fabrizio. I am very wary of the time because I know you have to drop off early. So unless, of course, something has changed, and I just wanted to thank you for your contributions, and we hope to have you at another time. And we are really looking forward to rallying behind the UN on this digital cooperation, because it's so important. We need to get this lifeline. So thank you for joining us, Fabrizio. So the rest of us are still on the panel. We are not going anywhere. I'm coming back to you, Sonia, right now. You mentioned, just like Fabrizio has said, you talked about the role of digital being a magnifier, but it also exposes some of the fragilities within the space, some of the harms, and it shows. It also exposed the digital gender gap as well. So I just wanted to find out from you, from your experience working in Bangladesh and maybe generally in the tech space. I'm sure you've come across the discrimination that women face in this space and some of the issues they face in terms of digital rights. What do you think are some of the hidden dangers with pursuing a digital economy, and what can we do? What can policymakers do to ensure that we have women who are participating in the digital space, but also staying there to be able to make an impact?
Thank you, Eleanor. So, as the fourth industrial revolution kicks in, we need to really look at the value of inclusion. It's not about men losing jobs to women when we talk about inclusion. It's about humans losing to automation. That is what the fourth industrial revolution brings. So I think that the inclusion of women is a joint responsibility with all stakeholders, and exclusion has joint risks. So women traditionally are not very aggressive in technology. And when we talk about the digital cooperation, it is a whole host of issues that need to be addressed from the policy perspective, from the employer's perspective, and from the perspective of women themselves. Let me begin by talking about women themselves. I think that the time has come now for women to be more ambitious and to be more aggressive than before. If you want to win a game, you cannot be a spectator. You have to play the game. You will either win or you will lose. So it is upon women, and it's a call to all women to say, please show up. You need to be in the game, because nobody is going to play for you. You need to do that. As women come, more and more women are coming, especially in the tech field. We're seeing that the numbers are increasing. There's a lot of focus on STEM from academia, from industry, to promote women's participation. Then we need the policymakers and the private sectors to unite and make it easier for women to come. So the digital literacy skills have to be increased from the academia perspective. and especially targeting for women because there is a gap they need to fill to come forward. And then from the policy perspective, equal opportunity or making, bridging it easier, making it easier for women to come into play.
Talking about women also seizing the opportunities that are, are coming up, and also participating in the policy making process, making sure that their rights are being heard, that they are empowered, and that they are also coming to showing up to be counted at the table. So I'm coming to you, Lassina, right now. You've heard Sonia's submissions from South Asia. Smart Africa, what is Smart Africa doing in terms of its strategy and policies to address the digital gender gap and to ensure that there's inclusion across board so that nobody is left behind in the development of the digital economy?
Yes, thank you very much for your questions. And in Smart Africa here, we do have that included throughout the whole paradigm of the digital transformations, which is promoting girls in ICT. You probably know that already, or you've seen that through our flagship summit, what we call Transform Africa Summit, where every Transform Africa Summit, we do have a competition called Miss Gig. And the Miss Gig, which is very important, Girls in ICT Days, together also with the ITU, we do celebrate that. And even through the SATA program, which is a Smart Africa Talent Academy that we put together. The Smart Africa Talent Academy, it's a vehicle to actually carry the capacity building within the community of the Smart Africa members. So within that, there are even specific trainings, specific courses towards the girls and women's and ICT, and to support innovation, entrepreneurship in the women's sector in order to balance the gap or digital divide, a gender divide in terms of embracing technology. And we do that also. In fact, Smart Africa can be a typical alliance to promote that, because within the ICT ministers of the Smart Africa country members, women are the majority of the ICT ministers. So we also use the women. Exactly. If you take an example in South Africa, in West Africa, within the ECOWAS country, the women are majority of ICT ministers are women. Yeah. So they help a lot with the promotion too.
Yeah, actually, I do know that the minister for Rwanda, minister of ICT for Ghana, for Benin as well. So you're right. There are quite a lot of women ICT ministers. So I'm just hoping that.
Let me be precise. Minister of ICT Senegal, Mali, Benin, Togo, Burkina Faso, Rwanda, yes. South Africa, Ghana. It's their majority.
Yeah, but it's very impressive and good to know. So it means that we're expecting to see a lot more infusion of gender into policy making at the regional level, and to ensure that comes through in the strategies that we are developing as well. So we just have about 8 minutes to the top of the hour. And I'm just trying to check if we have any comments coming in or any questions. So I can't see any for now. So I think we could just go into, just looking at the final level now. We've talked about digital cooperation. We've talked about inclusion. We've talked about the funding gaps now. What should be the next steps from here? What should be the first things that we should tackle in order to start the steps towards achieving universal meaningful and affordable access? So I'll start with you, Lassina. What should be the role of Smart Africa in this space? What should be the first things you should be tackling?
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. From now on, we must understand nothing will and nothing should be the same again. For that, as we know the role of the technology of digital transformation, what does it do in the social economic development? I think number one thing our country members, I think in particular and in general in Africa, we should understand, actually digital transformation should be an essential service. It is no longer a luxury service, as you mentioned it before. So if we have a digital transformation as an essential service, what does that really mean? It means that if you are going to build a hospital, you must be thinking about a platform for digital, for connectivity at a distance. If you're thinking about school, you must be thinking about the digital. If you think about a private business, you must be thinking about the business to customer, which is a B2C. The government itself must actually embrace digital at its heart. At its heart, what does that really mean? It means e-services. There's no digital transformations as long as the public service and private service are transformed into digital services. So that's why the digital transformation, the message, the takeaway message that I really want to leave here, the digital transformation, it is not one sector. It is the sector that goes through the whole other sector of the economy that makes it transversal. So we must be focusing on that in order to fight the COVID and similar pandemic yet to come in the future, to be able to be a digital world and to be respecting social distancing. It is our only way out.
Yeah, I love that. You know, how digital is like the backbone, and everybody else is just you know, joining to it, and that's how come, you know, that's how we can get to grow as well. So Sonia, what about you? In terms of what do you think the key steps should be, the immediate steps towards reaching that goal of ensuring that we have universal access beyond the pandemic, and to be able to be prepared for future pandemics as well?
Thank you, Eleanor. So I think I'm going to take a little bit of a private sector approach in answering your question, because
Sure.
we've talked
Yes,
about
please go ahead.
connectivity, and we've talked about connectivity, and we've talked about it being affordable. But really, the point that I'm trying to make is that economies of scale kick in when a lot of people use any product or service. So connectivity is very similar. It should be free like the air we breathe, but the air is required for us oxygen. We need oxygen to live. So connectivity should be similar. We shouldn't just fight for connectivity. We should have services built upon that connectivity so that it is the oxygen of people's lives, so that a service depends on connectivity, and connectivity is a byproduct. It is not the product. In order to do that, I think we should have all countries unite, and the United Nations is a great example. The least developed countries, as Fasina mentioned, the 47 of them, we should sit together and see how do we bring the costs down of providing connectivity to citizens. But that's only the first step. The answer really is in what services are we building on that the citizens will use connectivity to make their life better, to be digitally included, and let it become the oxygen for people's services.
All right, thank you, Sonia. And just when I thought I was wrapping up, I've just seen two questions that have come up. So I would just, you know, there's just one here about, to you, Lassina, global financial institutions and governments, private sector, do you think they are aligned in terms of investments? And then, Sonia, I'll come to you with this question. How do you think, how resilient can the scaling up of accessibility be to the impacts and consequences of climate change? So we'll come to you, Lassina, first. The question about global financial institutions and whether they are, you know, aligned with private sector and government, or are they going in separate directions?
You know, I like this question because I like to be bold. You see, when it comes in terms of Africa, the global financial institutions, not all of them, there are certainly exceptions. You can see the percentage of investment going into the ICT into Africa. That will make you understand what is the real visions. For me, as a Smart Africa Director General, on the name of the Smart Africa, I think African countries need to take their own responsibility in terms of connectivity. Connectivity in order to innovate and also to transform. You can't transform if you don't have a connectivity, you don't have. So if you look at the global financial institutions today, the focus will be, of course, the fundamental of Maslow hierarchy, which is having a hospital, having roads, having schools, having so on and so forth. I'm not saying it's really bad. And the global financial institutions today, the direction and the vision is Africa is seen to be the #1 exporter of that raw material, #1 exporter of that material. I am saying Africa and Africans, we need to stop being exporter. We have to be the producer. We have to stop consuming. In order for us to stop consuming and producing, the fourth industrial revolution is our way out. Why? Because we have 800 million population younger than 30 years old. It is also a resource. Why we cannot be? Africa together is about 1.3 billion population. So that is my answer. I think they need to revisit the priority in terms of investment into each African country to give a bigger priority to digital transformation. That is what I'm asking.
All right, so you're challenging the investment community to rethink the way they look at Africa in terms of priority.
Absolutely.
So that's a message to anybody who's listening. All right, thank you so much, Lassina and Sonia. You have a minute. Do you think you can do it? A response
Yes,
to
I
the
can.
question about
So, yeah, really
right.
quickly, the climate change and technology, the ICT footprint is very important for climate change because, as we all know, traditional servers and equipments cause a lot of heating. So the race is on for green computing. All the big tech giants are looking at alternatives for not polluting the earth with such heat and technology. We're looking at all alternatives that can reduce the climate change effect. So that's my short answer.
Thank you so much, and we are just on time. My guests have been Fabrizio Hochschild, who had to leave much earlier, Lassina Kone for Smart Africa, and Sonia Bashir Kabir of SBK. You've been such a wonderful panel, and there's so much more we've learned. We need to get behind the UN digital cooperation. We have work cut out for us to make sure that nobody's left behind, that everybody has meaningful and affordable connectivity and feels safe online and can utilize the full benefits of the internet. So thank you so much, RightsCon, for having us on this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you.